So let's think about a few sort of policy applications of this. Okay, so for many families, the chief household production activity involves raising children. So parents want to provide their kids with quality care, regardless of where this care comes from. It could be provided entirely by themselves in the form of a stay-at-home parent, or maybe it's provided by someone else, as is the case of daycare, military school, or a babysitter. And regardless of where it comes from, it's something that households generally consume. So the question becomes one of how to produce it, either on their own by earning income, either they produce it on their own, or they earn income and purchase it from outside the home. So what effects do various programs that are designed to help with this have on labor markets? Okay, and so let's think about childcare subsidies. Okay. Now, as it turns out, roughly 45% of American children under the age of 5 are cared for by paid providers of childcare, which on average eats up something like 10.5% of a family's annual income and approaches 19% of a family's income if that family is earning less than $36,000 per year. So for low-income families, childcare is a tremendous percentage of their real income. Okay, so in a very real sense, just merely caring for a child is a very expensive endeavor, which I'm sure your high school health teachers have told you, or maybe your parents, right? Now, over the last several decades, there have been several programs that have either been created or expanded to help pay for these programs. And as a result, they've had significant effects on the labor market. And so let's consider the effects that these policies have had, as each one works in slightly different ways and has slightly different implications. So one thing we can try to do is reduce the fixed costs of childcare. Okay, so suppose for now that childcare costs are entirely fixed. So essentially, they cost a certain number of dollars per day, no matter how many hours the child is in care. Okay, so every daycare is paid for by the day, regardless of hours the child stays there. Right, so let's say that the daycare charges $50 a day, right? And that $50, right, if you leave your child there for 1 hour, it costs you $50. If you leave your child there for 10 hours, it costs your child $50. Okay? Now suppose further that a subsidy is put in place that covers all of the expense. Okay, so for people who are not currently working and are contemplating sending their child to daycare and finding a job, this policy is great, right? As it would lower the cost of doing so and encourage them to find new employment opportunities that they previously were not finding. But what about people who are currently working and purchasing their child care, right? What would it do then? Well, in these cases, it may actually induce them to work less than they were before, because they were partly working so that they could pay for the child care. And with the subsidy, however, they now don't have to work quite as much and can afford to take more time as leisure or devote it to other household production activities, right? So for families that are already working full time and are paying the cost of the child care, right, they might find it beneficial to reduce the number of hours that they work for income and increase the number of hours that they do other household production things other than childcare. So maybe the one parent will work 3 hours less per day, and will spend those 3 hours instead working around the house, right? Or maybe they'll do other things. Maybe they'll just take a little vacation during the day, right? They'll just come home and relax, right? Knowing that the child is safe in daycare, right? Maybe, right? And so for families where one parent is currently staying at home to take care of the child, right? These families might increase the number of labor hours that they provide, because now they can afford to send their child to daycare for the day, and then they can actually just go to work, right? For families where the both parents are already working, they might find it beneficial to reduce the number of labor hours and increase the number of hours they spend at home doing other things. Okay. What about cases where we reduce the hourly cost of childcare? Right. So most places, most childcare establishments or places will charge you based on the hour or the amount of time that your child is there. So each hour, right? Each hour might cost some number of dollars. Let's say $15 per hour. Right? So each hour costs $15, and so you do pay sort of a marginal cost for each additional hour. Okay, and so here, so in the notes, right? I'll be consistent with the notes. So I'm going to change it to $2 per hour. Okay, so if each hour of daycare costs $2 per hour, then what's going on is that this reduces your hourly wage by $2 per hour, right? Because for every hour that you're at work and for every hour that you leave the child in daycare, it's costing you $2, okay? And so if a government subsidy were to reduce the child care costs to zero, it would essentially be the same as giving every parent a $2 increase in their wage, or at least one parent from every household, right? And so for people who are in the workforce already, this would create both an income and a substitution effect that would work in opposite directions as they normally do. And whether or not the person works more or less would depend on which effect was bigger. But for people not in the labor force, the increased take-home wage would make it more likely that they would join the labor force and actually look for work, right? Because basically we've got it as the case where their wages have gone up by $2 an hour. They can now afford to send their child to work, and so it's more likely that these people would ultimately send their child to daycare and go to work instead, right? Now, so while the theoretical implications of these programs is obviously a bit mixed, and the empirical results are also mixed, one thing that should be abundantly clear is that reducing childcare costs has the effect of increasing the labor force participation rate, particularly among women, and even more particularly among households with the lowest incomes. Okay? The important thing to recognize, however, is that the people who receive the subsidies do see their overall household wealth, which is the sum of income, household production, and leisure. Their household wealth will increase. Okay. Now, an important question, which we won't be going into in this class, unfortunately, is whether or not that increase in their wealth is worth it from a societal standpoint. Okay. The money to pay for these things has to come from somewhere. And so the question is something that, from an efficiency standpoint at least, would need to be answered. Now, questions of these sorts deserve their own class, and so while they're interesting, I'm going to have to leave them unanswered here. But feel free to come by my office and chat about them, and we can talk more in depth about them whenever you guys want. Okay?